In this video, I'm going to show you the quick and easy way to paint Star Wars Legion Stormtroopers with Games Workshop contrast paints. So relatively recently, I got into Star Wars Legion. I bought a starter, bought a bunch of add-on boxes, and my plan is to completely build out an 800-point list and then start adding to that of Empire, and then an 800-point list of Rebels, and then start adding on to that. Also buildings and all kinds of stuff like that. The thing is if you're gonna build a decent list of Empire, you know, the bad guys as it were, you're gonna need a lot of Stormtroopers. And I mean like a lot of Stormtroopers. So the list that I've built is, at least my initial one, has 4 squads of just regular old Stormtroopers. So I was like, all right, that's gonna be a total of 28 guys. I'm not gonna run all 28 of them in the list. I don't run squads of full 7. I mean, I don't think you technically can within the rules. You have to pick one of the 2 heavy weapons people that come in the box. So the max you can run is 6. In many situations I'm running 5, but I want to have the flexibility not only to run 6, but potentially run either of the 2 heavy weapons, even though one of them is not that great. But the idea is I don't want to leave any Stormtrooper unpainted, and I want to get them done as quickly as possible because, frankly, Stormtroopers are a little boring. Very black and white, obviously, if you've seen any of the movies. You can get fancy with them if you want to and make them all kinds of different colors, but I wanted them to be normal, but I did also want them to be a little grungy. I didn't want them to be parade ready like they are when they're up on the Death Star. I wanted them to be out on the ground doing stuff. I just recently rewatched A New Hope recently, episode 4, and there's that scene where they're out in the desert and they're like, look sir, droids, and like those guys are a mess. Those Stormtroopers are covered in something, and it's not sand. I don't know. I think one of them fell into some poop, and then the others tried to help him out. I'm not sure. It's weird. So I'm not going to go that far, but I am going to keep them a little grungy, and there's a super quick way to be able to do that, and that's where the Games Workshop contrast comes in. So the contrast paints came out early this summer, and I've been using a bunch of them and trying them out. Actually, I've used all of them at this point, and I'm going to make a video eventually that says this is what I think about them all specifically. Some are great, some are not so great. I'm just going to put that out there as a spoiler. But there are 2 colors that are absolutely perfect for our friends, the Stormtroopers, and that is Apothecary White, and that is Black Templar. Those 2 colors make going through your Stormtroopers super duper quick. So first thing you do is you build yourself a Stormtrooper, and you get him built, and you also texture the base. Now, this is up to you, but I'm a big fan of texturing the base before you start painting. I made a video about it years ago. Pachow. The big benefit is that once you start priming, then you're already covering up all the grit and the sand, and you're putting more layers on it, you're making it stay there a little bit better. It's a good idea. Do your basing texture before you start to paint. The other thing is that a lot of times you get done painting, and then you're like, oh great, now I can start basing, and then you never base, because it's like you finished, but now you have another finish line. So if you put it at the beginning, it just makes more sense, and I'll talk a little bit more about basing at the end. Anyway, you take your first guy here, and you build him, and you base him, and then you get set. And the next thing you do is you prime him. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of cooking show magic here. I've got a squad already all done to each point, and I'll be able to show you. So here, primed white, and this guy is pointing in that direction, or potentially that direction. So what you do first with your primed white, and once you've primed your models, whether you use rattle can or airbrush or a brush on, let it sit. Always let primer sit at least 12 hours, maybe more, but definitely let it sit, and then start doing your painting. So first thing that we do is we take our Apothecary White, and we shake it real good. Now, you might be able to see it here. There's a bit of schmutz on the bottom, this white stuff here versus the gray stuff that's the rest of it. It's super important with the contrast paints that settle to make sure to completely shake them real good before you use them, because if you don't, they don't do their job as contrast paints well. Some of the contrast colors don't seem to separate like this, which is weird, but definitely the Apothecary White does. That's a lot better. So we take our Apothecary White, and we're just gonna start kind of almost literally slopping it on. Don't get all kinds of puddles and stuff like that, you know, but definitely get it in there, and then when you see places where it starts to collect and get gross, then you should definitely kind of sop that up. If at any point you need to get some paint, some of the contrast paint gone, then the thing you need to do is just take your brush, rub it on your piece of paper towel, and then you use your brush almost kind of like an eraser to suck up the stuff that you don't need. But it is certainly, definitely one thick coat. Get it pretty much everywhere. You can not get it on the gun if you don't want to. That's up to you. But yeah, top of the head, on the hands, everywhere. There's only a few places where Stormtroopers aren't white, so you can still get it in those areas, certainly, but you're going to want to make sure that you definitely get it into all the areas that need to be white, and then we're going to go back and fix it. Because he's going to make your Stormtrooper, frankly, look a little gray. This is apothecary white, but it is actually just a very light gray. So he's going to look a little icky, but the next step will fix that. And this is the important part about how to paint Stormtroopers, in my mind, with contrast paints. Get it in between the legs, get in all the different areas you need to get it in. And it's literally that fast. Go over and look, especially sometimes down in the bottoms of the legs, like the stuff starts to run down, and then you're going to want to kind of soak that up a little bit so you can just suck up any kind of weird spots where it puddles, and then there you're done. So this is what he looks like after he's done. You can see he's got a definite gray thing going on. He's a gray Stormtrooper, but we're going to fix that. And the way that we're going to fix that here is we're going to use dry brushing. Now, in the past, I've done a video about dry brushing, and I use makeup brushes, cheap makeup brushes from the dollar store or Walmart or whatever. This one's a pretty small one. You can tell here, this one's got a relatively small head. I've got big ones and small ones and all kinds of stuff, but these make your dry brushing amazing. So what you do when you're going to dry brush with this stuff is you find your white paint that you like. I'm using the paint from Monument. Yeah, I like this stuff a lot. And what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to put it on like a little plastic palette. None of this process, unless you get to basically, once you get to the basing, none of this requires a wet palette. Obviously nothing really requires a wet palette, but it's really nice to use a wet palette. But because we're basically using dry brushing and contrast paints, wet palette is not important. I would tell you to probably not put contrast paints on a wet palette. That's just me. So what we'll do is we'll just put a glob of white there. And then we'll take our kind of gray Stormtrooper and we're going to dab just a little bit. And then we're going to come over here to our paper and we're going to rub most of it off. Go in circles, crosses, rotate the brush as you're doing it and get it nice and mostly gone. And then you're just going to start dry brushing. Now, generally, I'm dry brushing down. The top of the head is super important. So it's important to have that part definitely be highlighted in white. But you're just going to back and forth, probably not up, mostly side to side, but mostly down if you can. And find the big flat areas. So like the side of this thigh here, you definitely want to try to get a bunch of white into the flat areas. But that little edge right there next to like where that ridge runs down the front of his thigh, that's where the shadow, aka the apothecary white, needs to be. So you're just going to keep doing this and kind of pulling it down and catching all of the shadow stuff. You know, trying to basically soak up again, not soak up because it's already dry. Make sure you let this apothecary white, any of the contrast paints, they always need to dry before you go to the next step. And it can take some time. But you just basically go back and scrub back and forth a little bit here and there in certain areas. Other areas just draw down. You can go back and forth side to side as well. Do what you like, but get yourself a basically white, but now with a little bit of gray in the recesses and stuff like that, Stormtrooper. And if you want the feet to be dirtier because he's been sloughing around in the mud and stuff like that, don't do as much down there. But that's pretty much it. You get yourself a now less gray but more white, but still a little gray Stormtrooper. So now this one is a dried dry brush because we don't want to start working on the dry brush without giving it a good amount of time to dry, maybe 10 minutes. But so here's our guy who's all taken care of. He's all been fixed up with the dry brush white on top of the gray treatment that he got with the apothecary white, which is really more of an apothecary gray, but that would have been weird if they would have called it that. And now it is time to paint the black parts. And for the black parts, we're going to use the other contrast color that we're going to be using in this situation, and that's going to be Black Templar. Black Templar is also an amazing, in my opinion, contrast paint. And we're going to use it on all of the parts that need to be black on the Stormtrooper. So Stormtroopers, obviously their gun needs to be black. Their hands, the gloves, are black, but on the back of their gloves, back here, there's this weird little white piece of armor that we want to keep white. So you need to be very careful about that. Any places where you can see the under glove of their armor, so like on this guy here, that elbow right there, that's something that you're going to want to make sure you get a little bit of black into. I don't do it on the knees unless, actually on this guy here, this unpainted one, if he is, like I painted his knees because he's got such a bent leg that you definitely see a lot of knee. But on this guy, even though he's bending his knees a little bit, I still don't paint the black in there. When you're trying to get these guys done quickly, it's all about efficiencies. So, but back here by the butt, you do see a good amount of the under glove sort of outfit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our brush a little bit wet. We're going to dry it off, and then we're going to go right into this stuff here. And we don't obviously dip our brush too far. I'm doing just a little bit of, not all the way. And then what we do is we start working on the butt. And the thing is because this stuff flows so nicely, because it's such a liquid thing, it can really get in there. And you don't have to paint it as much as you do with normal paints. It will flow a little bit into crevices and things like that with capillary action. Now, I will be perfectly honest with you. I am having a hard time doing this at this angle. This is one of my kind of newer sort of painting techniques with the camera up here and all that kind of stuff. But normally I'm super close. And I'm usually wearing those magnifier things that I did a video about a while back. So yeah, this is kind of new ground for me, but you're gonna get in the butt area there. Some people will even paint like the sole of the shoe or the boot, whatever I guess that they carry or wear. But if this guy's on his knee here, right, this unpainted guy, I definitely paint that because it makes sense because you can see the entire sole of his shoe. Some of these models, like this guy, you can see the sole of the shoe right there. So that guy too, I generally paint the sole part, but I don't usually paint the ridge part, all the way around. So in this situation, I'm pretty much just gonna keep grabbing some paint here and just keep filling in those parts. When it's time to paint the gun, it's a pretty simple thing. You can get the fingers in there. You can get the whole thing. I don't go through and dry brush afterwards on the gun to lighten it up again. I want it to be as dark as possible. You could certainly, but you don't have to. Again, being very careful about this panel on the back of his hand. This little panel back here on the back of his hand is difficult, and I'm going to have a hard time getting in there. Let's see if I can get in there. Yeah. As I'm getting older, it's becoming more and more difficult to do this without my magnifying and keeping it close, but we're going to do it. The other things that we definitely want to watch out for as well are the eyes. So on these guys, you've got the eyes, and you might want to use a thinner brush than this. I'm using a big brush, but it's got a pretty good tip. Let's see if we can't get in there. Let me get my head out of there. But you kind of get in there, and because of the capillary action, you can sort of get in there and fill it up, and get in there and sort of fill up that area. And if you do get some on the ridge, we're going to fix that in like the next step, so it's okay. They also have this headband across the top. I am honestly not going to even attempt doing that at this because I, again, can't completely see here super well without my magnifying glass and being real close and dumb looking, which is hard to show you folks. But you basically go through and use the Black Templar contrast color on all the black parts. You can catch down there in between the legs if you want to. Some of the poses have more of a gap there than others. You catch the butt. I generally don't do the back of the legs because you almost never see it. And you just get all those parts together. And then what you end up with is, ta-da, you get yourself a painted Stormtrooper. He's got all of the black parts black. There's his gloves. There's that elbow. You've even got a gap back there by the shoulder in this particular pose. There's a whole lot of butt showing back here by this guy. And that's pretty much about it. Oh, actually I missed on this when I pre-painted it. I missed the back of his little foot here. So we're going to get in there and touch that up. Okay. There's also a hair on him. So what's the next step once you've got the black painted black and all the white painted white? You want to go back now and do some highlighting. And again, in this situation, what I'm going to do with the highlighting is use the white that I used for dry brushing before. I've still got it here on this palette. In this situation, you could use a wet palette if you wanted to, because this might be almost a little dry. It's not yet, so that's good. And you do want your highlights sometimes to be a little bit gummier. It depends on the person. Some people don't. So what I do for highlighting in this situation is I catch the tips of the knees right along here. And then this knee, this weird kind of bumpy knee that they have always on their right knee, I always make sure to kind of highlight each of the kind of raised bits. There, 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 there. And then that knee. And then there's, on each of the shoulders, they have this kind of ridge on their armor. You can see it right there. And I like to also highlight that. And again, what you're doing in this situation, this is my recycled plastic palette. What usually you're doing is you're actually running it along the side. And that's really important, because what you do is you just sort of, instead of trying to use the tip, you're running the brush along the side to get that highlight. And that helps to get that part, that raised part, to stand out from hopefully the apothecary white kind of grayish stuff that should be right on each side of it if you did it right. So we just catch those and catch that. Now, I also have a tendency to go through and do a little bit of a highlight right along what would be the nose if Stormtroopers had noses. It would be right along here, actually. And I have a tendency also to take a little bit of white and catch it right along the bottom of these things, right below their lenses. Especially if I got any black paint, any of the contrast paint on that part, then I can go back and clean it up. It's real simple. And then if I really schlopped this part up across here, then I can also go through and just throw a little bit of a highlight right along the front, because you always want to have, it seems like, more light on their faces than you would on their non-faces. You know, like if you light the model with paint, and so when you have more light on the face and less in the back, it just kind of draws the eye to the face and that kind of stuff. So yeah, you go just touch those parts up. You can touch up more parts if you want to, as far as like maybe the ridges along, you know, like this. You know, you could even do a little bit right there. It depends, you know. Sometimes you don't want to do highlights down underneath, like the belt here is very bumpy underneath there. You can see that belt. Well, I wouldn't go through and highlight that area because it's kind of down in the shadow. But then once that's done, you paint up your base however you want to do it. I like to do it like with a desert theme, and you're done. Like literally, it's that many steps. You build it, you put your basing material on there, you prime it white, you apothecary gray or apothecary white everything, let that dry brush white to bring up the white again, paint the black parts black with black Templar, then go in and touch up and do some highlights with some white paint, the same stuff that you used in the dry brush, and then finish your bases. And that's literally it. You've got yourself a finished, you know, Stormtrooper. And if you're smart, you would be doing all 7 at a time that are in the box. So you're just doing, like when you're done doing this step on that guy, and then you go through all the 7 guys, by the time you get done with the last guy, the first guy should hopefully be dry, or at least pretty close. Depends on what you're doing. The apothecary white might take a bit longer to dry, especially if you put it on extra heavy. But that's pretty much all you got to do to get yourself a bunch of painted Stormtroopers very quickly. And so far I've done, not including this squad, 4 squads. So that's 28 guys. I've also gone through and painted their left shoulder a different color to differentiate between the squads, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Some people paint the bases, you know, different colors, like the rim, that kind of stuff. This desert kind of basing that I did here, this was a simple kind of a desert yellow color. I think it was a Vallejo desert yellow color. And then I threw down a sepia wash, and then I went back and dry brushed a bit with the desert yellow. And then I dry brushed a little bit more just in the highest areas with the bleach bone, and then paint the rims and you're done. So the contrast colors from Games Workshop work spectacularly well on these Stormtroopers. I'm probably going to be figuring out how to use them on Rebels next, because I'm painting a whole bunch of Rebels soon. Probably not going to be as many squads of like just straight Rebels as I have just squads of straight Stormtroopers. But still, there's a lot of good colors in the contrast range that will work well out of browns and things like that. That'll work great for the Rebels. So get yourself some Apothecary White and some Black Templar, and get yourself some white paint that you like for dry brushing and for the highlights, and figure out how you want to do your bases. Maybe you want to have them on a spaceship, maybe you want to have them in the jungle, whatever you want to do. Get that stuff together, crank through these guys really quickly, because the contrast colors can really, really speed things up.